Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. Well, welcome to another episode of The Wisdom of, obviously where we want to dig deeper into what's the real wisdom that people have had high levels of success have learned over time. You know, we're not about tips, tricks, hacks. It's actually about the deeper, profound wisdom. And today I'm joined by Ant Williams, who's a business psychologist. He's an Australian. He's also a world champion free diver, and he's the founder of Modus Leadership. Now, Ant has held his breath for over 8 minutes, dived to depths of 100 meters, and even set a world record for swimming under ice, which feels not just like it's at the very limits of human performance, but it feels like a scary thing to do. And I think that's a part of what we're going to be talking about today. What makes Ant remarkable is how he takes the lessons from these extreme environments and brings them into the boardroom, helping leaders build courage, perform under pressure, and lead into discomfort so that they can achieve the goals and the aspirations and the vision that they're trying to take their organizations on. This is a conversation about risk, resilience, and what it really means to thrive when the stakes are high. So, Ant, thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to get into this. I'm sure everybody wants to know, what on earth is it like when you're hundreds of meters down underwater on your own and under ice? But thank you so much for joining us for the Wisdom of.
My pleasure, Simon. Thanks for having me along.
So the obvious question is, straight out of the gate, why? Why would you free dive? So just give us the explanation of free diving, because obviously you have no assistance, right? Why would you, like, you're an organizational psych, you're already doing work, you're working with elite performance and athletes and things. So why do you actually want to free dive hundreds of meters underwater and then under ice? What's the background of that? There's got to be a reason.
Yeah, there definitely is a reason. It wasn't always the way, Simon. I actually grew up in a deeply religious family, and it was all about following the rules, playing it safe. And I genuinely saw myself as quite a risk-averse kid. It wasn't till I guess later in my teenage years where I started really gravitating towards people who were athletic, doing sport, and had a sense of charisma, courage, risk-taking, and just this ability to stay so relaxed when they were on the field or playing. And I never had that. I really, my parents were more interested in music than the church, and so I didn't really end up playing a lot of sport. But because I loved sport, I ended up taking a career on where I trained up to become a sports psychologist. And it was probably in about 4 years into my career, I was working in Europe with a MotoGP racing team, racing motorbikes. And I remember going to a race, the team I was with, France Yamaha, they won this race, and it was big celebrations and team up on the podium, that sort of thing. And I had this really hollow sense inside where, and when I sort of investigated that feeling, it was like, I don't deserve to be here. I definitely don't deserve to be celebrating. Hand on heart, I've got no way of knowing if anything I've done here really contributed to the success. Everything I'm teaching comes out of a textbook. I have no lived experience. And I was 30 years old at the time. So I thought, well, if I really want to be good at my career as a psychologist, then it's not the traditional path. But my thinking was I needed some experience. I needed to go and find a sport, apply what I was teaching to others to see if it worked. And because most of my athletes were doing dangerous sports, MotoGP, they were cliff diving off cliffs, uh, surfing big waves. I thought it should be a dangerous sport. So there were a few sports that caught my eye when I was living in the south of France. There was bullfighting in Marseille. There was wingsuit flying in Toulon, or there was freediving in the village 10 minutes away from me. And so I took up the sport of freediving, and I've been doing it ever since. That's well over 20 years and competing internationally that whole time. And now I've literally just got back from holidays, and the holiday I went on was to go freediving. I just love it to bits now.
Yeah. And so this is, well, first of all, free diving literally is a single breath, right? Going as deep as you possibly can or deep to a target. Just give the parameters of the sport.
Well, there's three disciplines, but the main one is exactly as you've said. It's about going out into the open ocean, into deep water. It's about running a rope down with tags on that base plate and then nominating how far you think you can go. And then each athlete will have to try to reach that distance, the greatest depth possible for themselves on a single breath of air, retrieve a tag, and make it all the way back to the surface without blacking out. And sometimes those dives can take up to and exceed 4 minutes. And the depths you're going to, my deepest is 100 meters, and it can be, well, it was absolute pitch black darkness, and you're completely all alone and isolated at that depth.
And well, that's a lonely place and a scary place, I guess, if you haven't prepared yourself fully. So, you experience this imposter syndrome, which actually many people in business and sport and things like that experience at some point. Am I really as good as I'm trying to tell the world I am, or am I really capable of this thing? And so you go on that, what did you discover during that first, like really serious free dive where it was outside the limits a little bit?
Oh boy. I think every time I went a few meters deeper, I discovered something new about myself. And that's what really attracted me to stay with the sport. I never wanted to win competitions and I don't know, win medals and trophies. That was never my deal. But I did want to get some self-discovery. And so I found that quite early on, I found that just by pushing myself so frequently each week, that I would learn new things about myself. So I'd found that a lot of the techniques I was teaching had an incredible impact on my mindset, on my ability to deal with the discomfort of the water pressure that was on me, which does some really interesting and uncomfortable stuff when you're deep underwater. It taught me how to deal gradually. I learned how to deal with the fear,
Mm.
and not just the fear of that you might get running out onto a football field. These are far more primal fears: the fear of drowning, the fear of suffocation, the fear of being crushed in deep, deep water when you're all alone out in the open ocean in pitch black darkness, sinking. These are, yeah, very primal fears. And what I mean by primal is that they're everyone has them. You were born with them, and it's like an innate alarm system that warns you when danger is present.
Yeah, well, trying to get a breath, you know, or do something with breath when the weights are pulling you down, right? You've got weights on you to pull you down towards that plate at the bottom. So,
A little bit of weight. Normally, it's just a minimal amount of weight, but really good technique in order to move very fast through the water. We're moving about the pace of a light jog.
right, interesting. And so, it sounds, it sounds like such a fearful experience, but what you really do talk about is pressure. This is really about how you deal with pressure in multiple ways. And so, if we talk about pressure itself, and a lot of executives, a lot of leaders see pressure as something either negative or it has to be managed, or we have to kind of suppress the pressure or eliminate the pressure somehow. And you kind of see it differently to that. Pressure is not really the evil or the bad thing. I'd love to get your go deeper into this idea of the pressure you're going to put yourself under, to do this thing. I'd love to explore that idea of pressure a bit further with you.
Uh, what I've come to learn is that pressure can be your greatest ally. It can take you from, when your mind is untrained, I believe pressure can usually lead to some sort of self-sabotage in many occasions. But I also find that when you have trained your mind around how to perform under pressure, it brings out the absolute best in you. It just takes a bit of work.
Yeah. So, you said interestingly enough that pressure can become your greatest ally. I think if we use a really simple frame, and I know you have a framework for this, but this idea of above the, simple idea of above the line and below the line thinking that a lot of people are familiar with, pressure could be an ally. What if people don't see it as an ally? What is the below the line version? Like if we interpret pressure below the line, if we don't interpret above the line as an ally, below the line, what does it become?
Well, for me, it's two things. I think if you were to capture it in a single word, it's fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of not knowing if I'll cope with whatever comes my way, fear of the uncertainty of that moment.
Yeah.
And what it triggers in us is default behavior.
Yeah, right. So we're going to do it anyway, unless we've replaced that default behavior with something else.
Yeah, it's you're not going to be a conscious choice. We'll default into a pattern of behavior that's maybe learned or it's socialized or maybe we're kind of born wired that way. And I think for me, life is full of these moments of performance and pressure. It's not just so what I'm speaking to here is not just like big moments of risk or danger like freediving, but you touch on executives and leadership. I think leadership's just full of moments of performance and moments of
Yeah,
pressure. In fact, one of my favorite sayings is that some of the most important work of leaders is done in some of the most uncomfortable places.
yeah.
So that idea that we need to learn in what our default response is to pressure is important, but even more importantly is how do I shift it so that I unlock my real potential to perform how I want to perform when I'm placed under pressure.
So you talked about what if fear is a default behavior? How would we describe pressure as an ally?
Where it's liberating, where you feel free, where you actually are able to access the best part of you and be compelling, be impactful, to be influential, to be relaxed and calm, to allow your or just the automatic performance to happen. In sport, we call it a state of flow.
Hmm.
In performance in business, you can get that as well. I think we don't often use that same term of state of flow, but it's when everything comes together and you feel relaxed enough to be vulnerable in front of others, to just allow things to happen and not be fearful of what may trip you up along the way. It's like you trust yourself to cope with whatever's going to come your way, even though there's uncertainty.
So if we think about there's this transition into the actual performance, and we might call that, and anyone familiar with the flow work will understand this notion that flow doesn't happen um, immediately. It happens because of some things you've done beforehand. And I know timeline is a key part of your teaching as well. And what do you do? I had to listen to one of your keynotes, and so I'm pretty familiar with this. I'm familiar with this idea you share about what actually happens up to the moment. You actually need to step into this performance zone. But if pressure in some way from a timeline perspective is something we need to turn into an ally to liberate ourselves, to be able to get into flow. I'd love you to talk me through what's happening between this idea of this. I'm going to deal with some pressure here to get this performance, and I do want the performance. I want that result, and I do want to be at my very best as I go into that performance. Let's call that flow. Unpack the bit in the middle for me. Let's kind of give people some insights into what's going on between the start of this time frame and then the actual performance itself.
Well, a really simple way to think of it is imagine that you're traveling through life and someone is filming you, and
Mm,
you've got all these frames of a film that makes up your life. And then at some point in time, you're faced with a challenge. And we call that moment of time. So for you, it's that performance in the blue, right? That's our moment of time when, so if you think about leadership, it might be getting up on stage and announcing a restructure. It might be delivering some difficult feedback to
yeah.
someone else. Um, it could be anything that makes you feel comfortable in the moment, where in those moments before time, you start to find that you're getting anxious and nervous and you're getting a physiological change happening, maybe sweaty hands, flush face. You're starting to wonder if you're going to remember what you had to say, all those things. Those are those
Mm.
moments before time. So it might be time minus one, time minus two, time minus three, and so on. And each of these are the moments that precede that moment of challenge or performance. Now, what happens is we typically think about that moment of performance in leadership. We think, what am I going to say? How am I going to be perceived? What are they going to say? Are they going to yell? Are they going to cry? Uh, how is the team or this person going to experience me in that moment? Will they see me as leader-like or weak or like what's going to happen? And that uncertainty can sometimes create a sense of anxiety that blocks our really good cognitive parts of our cerebral brain from performing how we want them to perform. You know, that classic, I got up on the stage and I just couldn't remember what I was going to say.
Yeah.
And that's usually because of our physiological changes that Our breathing changes, our sense of relaxation, our state management isn't good. And and what we notice is that people tend to focus or fixate on what am I going to do in that moment of performance. But the real insight comes from understanding what I do in those moments before time.
Oh, yeah.
Time minus one, time minus two. So if you think about time minus one, that's that moment just before you perform, that moment where you most want to give up or yield or back away, procrastinate. But it's also how you perform in that moment is ultimately going to determine how well you do in your challenge.
And so, that's the moment people want to procrastinate and back away. What what's above the line? What is a practice that people need to acquire or learn to liberate themselves above that line? If below the line is yield, procrastinate, back away, T minus one. What, like, before you go on a dive, what is your T minus one for a free dive? Then you
Yeah.
obviously you're not backing away at that point.
My time on is one is when the official yells out 2 minutes
Yeah,
and the countdown starts because on zero I have to go. I have to hold my breath a long time. I have to dive crazy deep in the ocean. I have to submerge and start my swim for a long distance under the ice, and I know it's going to be incredibly uncomfortable and scary. That's my time on is one is the 2 minutes before I have to go. And so I think it'd be nice to I can see you suggesting it like talking about so what goes on? What do I do in that couple of minutes before I go? And before we get into that conversation, I want to say that it's different for everyone.
sure.
This is the really unique thing, right? Is that saying if you stay in your comfort zone, you never really learn a lot about yourself. But if you're always pushing outside of your comfort zone, taking on challenges, it's a wonderful way for self-discovery. Well, that absolutely holds true. And so learning what works best for you in time minus one, time minus two comes from experimentation,
Right.
from little bits of putting yourself out there.
And is that, is time minus one, are you bringing yourself right up to the edge of your performance preparedness at that point? Are you, like, if you think about that 2 minute call, what are you starting to do? Are you going into a routine? Are you going to a pattern? Are you going to something that you've done it many times before? It's customized for you, right?
Yeah, I am. So for me, it's down to several things. So it's very much about what I did in time minus two. So for me, that's like what music I'm listening to, a particular
Mm.
playlist that helps me get into that zone. And for me, it's Kiwi reggae. That's what I listen to. I've tried everything, and Kiwi reggae works the best for me. I don't know why, it just does. Uh, I have the right people around me, and it used to be that when I started out, I would tell people, "Don't talk to me. I want to be really focused. I don't want any distractions." And that didn't work at all. I had all sorts of manner of issues when I did that. And so now I tell people, even in the most serious of like extreme dives, like the one I did last year for Apple up in Iceland midwinter, going for a world record, told everyone, if you're around me, you gotta
Yeah,
have a smile. You gotta make me laugh. You can take the piss out of me. That would be great because
yeah,
that's going to really help. Just lower the temperature for me and I'll feel ready to go. So music, people. So I'm trying to control my environment a little bit. And what I'm controlling internally is two things. One is my breathing,
yeah,
and the other is my internal dialogue, my self-talk.
yeah,
My breathing is slow, it's rhythmic, it's steady. We call it box breathing, is what I do in the 2 minutes before diving. And my self-talk, I don't allow any negativity. I don't allow any self-doubt. It's all pre-programmed and it's all super uplifting and somewhat arrogant, I might say. I really build myself up.
So, you know, um, uh, we could almost make the argument that that top half is really about having routines that work, and routines that, breathing and self-talk is physiology and psychology. We could talk about routines on the top half that are not natural, and we could probably talk about, down the bottom, there are almost natural um, safety patterns that are going to happen by default.
Yes.
If you leave them to their own devices, you'll back away. Like, I'll do this another day. The weather's not quite right.
Find excuses.
And it's probably the bottom is probably more psychological than physiological.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's triggered by us, our physiological response, but then we go, this is too hard. I'm going to come up with an excuse. It doesn't feel right today. Somebody else should be giving this feedback. Um, Timing doesn't feel right. Whatever it is, right? We will use that physiological response of feeling bad to then come up with a clever way to escape our challenge.
Yeah. Oh, excuses and escape. I love that. So the routine um, along the bottom is uncertainty to anxiety to excuses to escape. The routine across the top is really about physiology and psychology to get to the performance. Well, in a single word, this T minus one is that 2 minute countdown. If we had an outcome in say the three T minus one minus two minus three, what is the real outcome someone wants to get themselves to before they step into the performance zone? Is it a state of calm? Is it a state of confidence? You said almost arrogance in
Oh,
some of
for
your
me,
self-talk.
I guess
It,
different for everyone.
it,
But
it
yeah.
could it could be customized or personalized to each person. But what is the real objective of that T minus one? You're good to go.
So for me, it's getting into your ideal performance state.
Okay.
And I'm really deliberate about that word state because it's a physiological and emotional state where you just feel not like, okay, then I'll grit my teeth and get through this. You actually embrace it. For me, if I know I'm in that and the ideal performance state, if I can just let go and just completely trust myself with what's about to happen.
Perfect. So above the line, getting to the point where you can let go and
Yeah.
let the thing happen, as
Yeah.
opposed to below the line where you're yielding, procrastinating, and pushing back by being in state. T minus two. What is that about to get you to the point where you can be in state?
Oh, so this is where it gets really interesting. T minus two, T minus three, T minus four. This is kind of like, what's your lead up? What's happening in the morning? What's happening in the afternoon? How are you leading up to that moment of performance? So for things that aren't that big a deal, you wouldn't worry about this. But if it's a really big deal for you, then I'm starting early. Like if it's a world championship competition, if it's a world record attempt I'm going for, if it's a really important moment for me in my career as a leader, I'm asking for a promotion, I'm asking for a raise, whatever it might be, then I'm thinking about how do I want to be when I enter that room or enter that space. And so it might start much earlier. So the first world record I did was to become the deepest man under ice. And my preparation starts that morning for a dive at 2 p.m. And everything, it's like I'm on the clock. I don't have to think because I get up in the morning and I'm like, what's my run sheet for today?
Yeah.
And I just follow it through. And so what I'm doing is I compartmentalize. I say, this morning I get up and I have my breakfast, which might be really light. And then I've got 45 minutes to go for a walk by myself. And then when I come back, I'm doing this and then I'm going to do that. And so I know what all those bits and pieces are that move me towards this space of being ready for my time minus one and my performance zone. And sometimes the things that you go in there, you kind of don't know until you've experimented a little bit and just keep the ones that work, get rid of the ones that don't, and then start to overlay it. What sort of music do I want to listen to at different times? I also do this thing where I go, when do I get to think about my challenge? A lot of people through T minus one, through T minus five or six are thinking about their challenge the whole time. We
Mm.
don't want to do that. We don't want to do that because then you become what's called hypervigilant, and it's very hard to then just switch on when the time comes. We want you to be switched off. So if it's high pressure that you're leaning into, then as you've got your routine that you've worked out for yourself or your preparation plan, then you've got to put place in there some moments where you think about the challenge. So for me,
Mm.
every couple of hours, I'm allowed 15 minutes. That's
Interesting.
it. And in that 15 minutes, I get all my fears out on the table. I worry about stuff. I go, oh, play all the what ifs and could I black out on global TV? And then I bring it back and go, I've answered all those questions. There's no more value in thinking about it further. I'm going to
Yeah.
switch.
So if we think about this, once again, as a pattern, as a set of as a way of thinking about it, and then I'd love to get onto some other things, another discussion with you out of this. If I just paraphrase this and kind of feed it back to you, we might say that a lot of people have a perform. Oops, I'll do it in a different color. A lot of people have a performance they need to deliver, which to them feels challenging and consequential. That there's a big outcome. That's going to be their moment of time, and that moment of time they have to step into a big challenge and perform. And the reality is to cross that line into performance mode, you need to find a way of getting yourself into flow, which is unfamiliar to most people. They can't get into flow. This is called the choreography of the model. And so it's the build it is one thing and walk through it in the other. And so this is a timeline where people take pressure that a lot of people interpret as fear, because that's the default mechanism. That's the natural safety patterns that exist around us to keep us safe. We'd rather do nothing than step into risk and do something. Or we turn that pressure to be an ally, which liberates us because we've done some specific things by building routines that work, that turn pressure into an ally instead of fear. And so if we think about this, stepping to that moment of time is really about understanding the moments before time. And the difference between the people that see pressure as an ally, green zone above the line, versus those that see pressure as fear, red zone below the line. T-1 is a critical time frame. This is when you're about to cross the line, be in flow and perform. And actually, this is about state, emotional state, physiological state, readiness basically to go. And if you really are in state, you reach the point where you're ready to just let go and let the performance come. But for most people, or many people, if they're stuck below the line, they're still trying to yield to the outcome. They're procrastinating. Basically, they're in this pattern of uncertainty, anxiety, excuses, and escape. Like, how do I get away from this, even at the last minute? As opposed to these patterns of physiology and psychological preparation. If it's free diving, it's breathing and then self-talk. The step back from state is, well, who am I going to be here? What are the routines that I have that help me show up as who I need to be in order to then be in that state and let go and do the thing? And then what am I doing beforehand? All the preparation from the very first moment I wake up to the people around me, what I'm asking them to do, what equipment do I have to have? What's my preparatory routines? And then, you do have to have an eye on what you're trying to do, but constantly thinking about the big goal all the way through pulls you out of state and removes you from being who you really need to be. And so you need to establish that goal, but then allow yourself only small amounts of time where you reconnect to it in a way that doesn't actually pull you below the line into the red zone. And so this idea of shifting pressure from being a fear to being an ally is this critical understanding of performance and the pre-performance over time, the moments before time and the moment of time. As you hear your own framework spoken back to you like that, does that make some sense as a framework to share with people?
Yes, it does. And I think I would just expand on it ever so slightly, because a couple of the things you've said, lead me to think of some kind of additional little bits of
Yeah,
gold that
sure.
come out of this model.
Yeah.
So when you get to that performance zone, if you follow your default line, then you usually get a really suboptimal performance. If you follow the liberating ally role by
Yeah.
actually doing some work on the preparation, then you normally unlock. In competition, we call it unlocking a personal best, but in
Yeah.
business, it might be that the sales pitch or the request that you make to the board
Yeah.
is just delivered in such a resounding way that it's hard to say no to. The other thing I wanted to say, Simon, is that I really like your label that you've given around what doing being state. The one that particularly stands out for me is T-2 when we talk about being.
Mm.
So T-2 for me in freediving is that 2 minutes to sort of an hour,
Yeah.
which is that broader space, but it's in that time that I switch. It's
Mm.
a really cognitive switch, that a deliberate switch that I make from being Ant Williams, knockabout guy, he's a dad, to a couple of kids, Luke and Chloe, and happily married to Marion, and runs his consulting firm, to then being Ant Williams, the freediver. And for me, that's part of who I am, and it's a very important part. But I make a conscious switch because I want it to be deliberate where I leave behind one identity, I really dial it down, and I massively dial up the other one, which is it's just still highly authentic. It's me choosing in the moment what part of me to express and to show the world. And when I do that, I really lean into that persona of this is who I am, this is what I do and what I'm about, then I access different resources mentally and physically because I really hold that space of this is everything in this moment is I am a freediver and one I'm the best of the world.
Hmm.
The more you're able to do that, the more it imbues trust that whatever comes your way, you're going to be fine. You're ready.
People would be so well served if everyone knew how to build their switch. That
Yes.
they could just flick to get into T minus two. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And then be able to lean towards T minus one. It's a really interesting framework. And, I think, anyone that has to step into these moments of time of performance would somehow understand this, except that what you've unpacked is this. I think what is really interesting about this for me is the addition of time to it that you've brought to it. It's actually what you're doing over a sequence of time. And it really also says that peak performance is never a default behavior. And it's something, and the more you build the patterns, the more you can step into it at speed, I would imagine. There are, we all know the stories of the routines that elite athletes have to be able to just switch on game face. There's in Australia with the Australian rules football game, people talk about white line fever, what happens to players as they cross that white line and they become a different human being to who they are when they're not on the field of play. Anyone in a leadership role, a sales role, a performance role that hasn't figured out how to build the switch, right, to get into T minus two, if we think about that framework again, it needs to be thinking about what are the routines that they need to do that work. That get them to the switch, and then allow them to flick the switch on. Fascinating framework.
So I was just gonna say something that one of the things I want to point out is that even if you do lots of these challenges, lots of pitching, lots of sales meetings, lots of difficult conversations, it doesn't necessarily make you good at them,
Mm,
switching or being good in the moment. What does make you good is when you have a great routine that moves you through that psychological frame to be ready to perform each time consistently at your best and
mm,
deliver. Because I think as leaders, people want us to show up a certain way. They want us to be leader-like. They want us to be on our game and show up as the moment requires. And
yeah,
so that takes more than just practice. It takes understanding and knowledge.
it absolutely does in preparation, and then also there are things that are physical things that are a part of that, and then the psychological things. So, for example, if I turn on an iPad with a blank screen, I switch into a different mode. It's one of the tools of me when I'm in facilitation mode through this work of helping people capture complex ideas into a model, right? So as soon as I turn an iPad on and the blank screen comes up, most other things that are distracting leave my mind, and then I'm focused on the work. It's a bit like, it's so there's a that you deep dive and there's a lot of pressure on you just because of the pressure of the water. So there's physiological or physical pressure that we can have a palpable response to, and then there's psychological pressure. Sometimes we mix them up, racing heartbeat and all this sort of thing. What are the real differences in your mind between the idea of the physical pressures versus the psychological pressures? And then how do you hold your head when the fear is really like you're at the bottom, it's dark, you're by yourself, you're in the middle of the ocean. And, I remember you saying you were ascending, but you weren't going up as fast as you thought you should. Like there's a big difference between the physical pressure and the psychological pressure. And one of them requires you to hold your head. What would you kind of share with us about that?
I think one leads to the other. I remember being at a freedive training camp in Turkey. It was a master training camp, and I had never been deeper than 52 meters. Now, that's pretty deep, but for a competitive freediver, I wanted to be like 60, 70 meters would have been really great. This is kind of early stages for me in freediving. And I was at this master training course for 2 weeks. I couldn't get any deeper. And I remember being, I remember being at a freedive training camp in Turkey. It was a master training camp, and I had never been deeper than 52 meters. Now, that's pretty deep, but for a competitive freediver, I wanted to be like 60, 70 meters would have been really great. This is kind of early stages for me in freediving. And I was at this master training course for 2 weeks. I couldn't get any deeper. And I just figured it was physiological. And so I started making excuses. This is just as deep as I get. I don't have good ears. Maybe my breath was not good enough. I had all these reasons that
Mm.
I gave myself. And then I remember there was this guy there, this guy called Toppy, a Finnish guy. And he'd broken some world record. He was an amazing freediver. And he hadn't spoken to me for 2 weeks. He was just so introverted. And then just before our last dive opportunity, we'd gone out and the water was pretty cold. And I remember it was quite choppy. And there was only a few of us, a handful of us in this sort of elite master camp. I was sitting down getting at the back, we call it the transom, the back of the boat. And Toppy was sitting next to me. Toppy leans over and he says to me, "Do you know your problem?" I was like, "What?" He goes, "Your problem is you don't know how to accept that you're going to be crushed on this dive and that it's okay, that you'll be fine. If you could just accept it and just let go and allow yourself to sink deeper, you're going to be one of the deepest guys in the world." And
Mm.
then he just swam away. I was like, that was weird. And then I got into the water, I swam over to the line, I clipped in, and all I could hear in my mind was let go, let go, let go. And as I sank down and the pressure started bearing down on me, I started having pressure in my throat. I noticed that at about 20 meters. And then by 30, it was like someone was just giving me a big bear hug. And then by 50, I'd completely run out of air and my lungs are about the size of a grapefruit. And all I could hear in my mind was let go, let go. So I did. Everything just relaxed, my neck, my throat, my jaw. And I went down to 68 meters that day,
Mm.
vastly deeper than I'd ever been before. And for me, it was I always had the ability physiologically, physically, technically, but my mind was holding me back. And so I think one follows the other. And often we try to rationalize why we're no good at public speaking, no good at sales, no good at dealing with someone who's irate with us in the moment. But often it's actually just a lack of preparation or the way that we're thinking about it. And often it's a lack of trust that we'll be okay.
Mm. Interesting. And if you think about, if we bring this to we bring this to business, a C-suite executive or someone in a pretty senior role, a founder of a company, what are some of the real differences you see between those business leaders that are able to apply, your approach to this versus those that really struggle? Is that the letting go, that the ones that really succeed this are able to just lean into a trust? Or are there other things that really the most successful people applying this seem to do differently to people?
I think that ability to let go is part of it, and it comes hand in hand with trust. So trusting that you'll be okay. That's a big part of it for sure. But then I think the best people, they put themselves in those positions on enough occasions where they've learned what works and what doesn't. And you go and talk to any executive and say, "Do you remember the first time you got bailed up by the chairman of the board over something and maybe something that had come out in the press? And how did you go? Like, did you go toe to toe? Did you stand your ground? Did you have a compelling point of view?" And they'll often go, "No, I got like railroaded. I felt terrible." But then those of us who then really think it through and go, what was it about what I said? What was it about what I could have done in terms of preparing better and anticipating that moment?
Yeah.
Those are the people who actually then the next time and the next time and the next time become highly proficient at it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Um, until you've had a near-death experience, like a serious near-death experience, it's hard to understand what a valuable lesson that is. And the whole notion of risk taking, that often risk taking doesn't result in the most catastrophic failure. What would you, if you were coaching a young leader coming through who has a certain amount of life experience, but not a lot yet, and maybe haven't had those, hey, I went to the board and they destroyed me. I had to come back from it all, which is a corporate version of the near-death experience. Or, I was pitching for the biggest sale the company was ever going to make, and I completely blew it. The customer did not buy. I actually didn't get the sale done well. What would you share with somebody about? These things are a part of the process? What lesson would you give that young leader about really step into it, catch the
Yeah.
lesson?
There's two things I would say to someone who's early on in their leadership journey. The first is be curious. Watch people who do it very, very well. Don't be intimidated, but instead ask yourself what I can learn, what I can take from the way that they do it.
Hmm.
The second thing I'd say is experiment. So
Yeah.
just be open to being challenged and know that mistakes aren't normally fatal. They're normally bruising, and I've had tons of those in my leadership career.
Hmm.
And you know what? You're always okay. It's hard at the time. It can be really hard at the time, but you will always learn from those experiences. And if you're prepared to experiment, and think of it this way, no one ever achieved their dreams from playing it safe, staying in
No.
their lane, and being a bit boring. If you put yourself out there, do some experience and try experiments and trying different ways of being and operating and showing up to some of those challenges, it won't always work, but you'll figure it out. And you'll figure it out way quicker than someone who avoids those time minus one challenges, gets someone else to deliver that bit of feedback, or take the lead role in the sales pitch. Yeah, put yourself forward, step into those moments because that's where the magic happens.
It's true. When people look at someone that's had some real success and they say something like, oh, they've been lucky.
Mm,
My response typically is no, they've worked harder than most and they took risks.
mm,
What people don't acknowledge or reward for is people that have been really successful at something took risks to get there, but they did the work to try and minimize the risk as much as possible. But they still took more risks than most other people. What's your view on failure then? There's a lot of, Instagram, social media, sound bites on failure. Um, some of them are just not at all helpful. But so frame up failure for us as and not just in the elite sport context, but failure as a part of the normal process of trying to perform at a high level.
Well, I think the most current saying now is fail fast, fail often,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I kind of like that. I think it's if you're not failing very often, you're probably not stretching yourself far enough. If you kind of go, when was the last time I failed and made mistakes at something, then and it's not recent, then maybe you're playing things a bit safe. So I do think that failure, most of our learning does come through failure. And so I think if you've got to set a certain level of challenge. And I think like a reflection task of every kind of quarter, thinking about where am I going to challenge myself in new, different ways this quarter to stay fresh, to stay challenged, to stay energized around what I'm doing in my role, then inevitably it's going to turn out in some failures and mistakes along the way. It's your ability to learn from those, to reflect. A lot of us don't do that. This is an amazing thing, is we put ourselves out there and we fail and we don't want to think about it because oh, that was embarrassing. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to discuss it, and we don't. The best thing you can do is you can go and ask people, hey, Simon, I think I cocked that up. What advice have you got? How would you suggest I do it differently? And
Yeah.
actively seek it out. If you've got a manager who doesn't do that for you and doesn't give you daily feedback or at least weekly feedback, seek it out. Go and find out because that's the only way you'll get past this.
Yeah, it's interesting. But I suppose the other thing, I mean, you know, um, fail fast, fail often. The downside of that is, of course, you could create a habit of failure. So when failure becomes a normal, oh well, yep, that failed as well. Well, I won't do that. And there needs to be some learning and discernment
Mm.
that comes from it. Otherwise, you throw out the whole thing you tried to do, as opposed to where did it actually go wrong. The lesson is the critical bit. And so,
It can become demoralizing. And with any junior athletes, one of the first things I do is try to get them multiple experiences of success. So it's like the boxer. I
yeah,
don't want the boxer to go and have three fights and lose all three. What's
no.
going to happen? The boxer there won't be a fourth because the boxer will go, hell no. So you're right. You've got to make sure that you're setting the level of challenge at the right amount so that you're getting plenty of success and balancing that with the learning and the mistakes.
So if we talk about a triangulated principle, so someone in the middle, and they have three people around them. Triangulation is one of the most robust geometric, or it is the most robust geometric shape to find every mobile phone on the planet, right? Um, so if you're someone that is pursuing high performance, you really want to make pressure an ally, be above that line in the green zone. Um, and so you are going to have some failure because you're pushing the boundaries. If you surround yourself with three people, that is your triangle, right? And you could go in any one of those three, closer or further away from any one of those three, but they're important in holding you solid in the middle. All of us need people around us. I mean, if you fail fast and fail often on your own, you eventually will stop trying. But that junior boxer who loses a fight, if they have the right three people around them, they'll come out of that and go, I've got the lessons. This is what I'm going to do. And this is a question without notice so that everyone's aware. I'm just dropping this on you without any kind of discussion. But if we were all building our own triangulation around ourselves, here's the three kinds of people I should put around myself. Is there a way of looking at that? Or are there three broad brush kinds of people? Do you need a cheerleader? Do you need a therapist? Do you need a planner? You're going after something big. I don't know. And there might not even be three that you could label, but I'd love to see what you think about that.
Yeah, it's one that I have given a lot of consideration to. Um, and I listened to a podcast recently where the expert was saying only surround yourself by people who believe in you and give you no negativity. And I was like, I don't know if I agree with that. A few years ago, I was up in northern Norway, high up in the Arctic Circle, trying to do a world record under the ice. This one was not to see how far I could swim, but how deep I could go under the ice.
Wow.
And it was brutal up there. It was minus 36 degrees. Um, the distance to go out to the hole in the ice was a kilometer by snowmobile. It was freezing cold, and the ice was 1.2 meters thick. And I had taken a crew of people up there who I just thought would be great to have around. A couple of mates, someone who was really good with ice diving, someone else who was good with safety. I, I I'd gone by what I thought would be fun and yeah, and enjoyable to be on a great adventure with. And I found that that was actually a dreadful approach that led me to very poor outcomes. My team basically imploded. And then when it came to the day of the dive, I had to really sit myself down and go, have I got, I don't think I've got the right team around me. Who do I really need? And I was like, there needs to be three people. And I was like, I want so the first person that I wanted was someone who was going to help me by being like, not my oracle, but my grounded, my sense of grounding. So
Yeah.
the person who was like, you use the term cheerleader. For me, not cheerleader, but someone who was like, I know you can do this, but you're gonna have to like stump up, mate.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like a sort of coach mentor, but I'm gonna put them the mentor. None of that they're telling me what to do. They were there going, I know you can do it, but I want to see you really lean into this today.
Yeah.
So I had that guy.
Yep.
Then I had the person who was making sure that the frame around me was a safe one. It was that I wasn't being stretched too far. He was my head of safety, and he was going to make sure that everything was going well. So I guess the commiserate would be, or the equivalent would be, someone who's like the coach who wants to see you being stretched, will be a bit of a guide, but also is there to make sure that there's nothing's really going to go wrong. You're just there to sort of test a few boundaries. That's all.
Yes.
And so those were my two really key people. And you could say, well, in that one, I gave myself I was the third person because I was like, yeah, I'm the person who's going to actually go and do this. I think if there had been three, but yes, if I put myself in the middle, then I would have put a third person who would have been the leader. Because I actually think in that particular dive, I was trying to be the leader and
Mm.
it work. I know it didn't work. And so when I took myself away from trying to be the leader and I was in the middle and gave someone else the role of leader, it worked. So I had a
Yeah,
leader, a coach, and a mentor.
that's interesting, fascinating. Thank you for all of that. I think we could talk about this and the translation into business and you know big roles that people have and kind of moments in time where they need to perform and what it takes to lead up to that. What you do with the free diving is actually a long way out of most people's frame of reference.
Mm.
And so it is great to come out of that discipline, that career decision you made at 30, that I've actually got to go and do this to be able to help people with this. I'd love to wrap up with three quick questions so people just know a bit more about you, if that's okay. Quick question, quick response. The first one is really obvious to me. What did you want to be when you grew up? Because I'm sure this was probably not it.
Oh, that's great. What did I want to be when I grew up? I wanted to be a phys ed teacher. I wanted to be some sort of teacher. And it was my mum actually that said to me as I was growing up, when I was trying to decide what to study at uni, I knew that I wanted to be some sort of teacher. And she said to me one day, "Oh, and I know you love sport. You're not very good at it, but you love it. Why don't you go and study to be a phys ed teacher?" That's what I did. I went to be a phys ed teacher.
Okay, fair enough. If you could solve one kind of unanswered question in the world today or mystery in any kind of arena, what would you love to be able to figure out? And then why is that important to you?
Oh, yeah, for me, I would like to solve how people lean into uncomfortable conversations with one another without becoming defensive or
Mm,
polarizing in the argument. And what I mean by that is, I feel like we've rapidly lost our ability to engage in meaningful debate where it doesn't descend to arguing about you're this, you're that, and changing it to a battle of personalities and insults.
mm,
And I just feel like we've, as a no, I don't know. I was going to say a culture or a nation. I think it's broader than that. I looked overseas to what's happening, and I just think we are so poor these days with
mm.
being able to hear perspectives of others and just sit in that quiet discomfort of how I feel about your perspective and respond to it without reacting to it. That's the
Yeah,
thing I would change.
and that would be massive. And then last quick one. So let's think about this in the context of your freediving career, right? More than your whole life. Is there a moment of pure joy where you really, in the freediving career, there was this moment where it just all the whole thing came together for you in that moment?
I've had lots of those moments, fortunately. I don't know if they outweigh my failures yet, Simon. But there was one that really stands out for me was I'd been blocked. I couldn't get deeper than 80 meters, which is getting very deep. But I spent 8 years trying to get deeper than 80 meters. And it was one very unique person that I met who was a freediver, who was a novice freediver. Actually, he'd only been doing it for a couple of years, and he explained to me why I can't get deeper than 80 meters. And despite all the world champions that I'd spoken to trying to explain to me how to do it, this guy explained it to me in under a minute. And then that next competition, I managed to dive down to 100 meters on a single breath of air. I was one of the first men in the world to go that deep in competition on a single breath of air, thanks to, in part, to his advice,
Wow, from a novice.
pretty much from a novice. Yeah.
Was that interestingly? Was that because he or she? I'm not sure.
Hey,
Yeah,
yes.
was that because he didn't have as many of the kind of perceptual boundaries that the real champions were working with? Was it something that he just didn't think shouldn't be done or couldn't be done, or just out of interest?
Honestly, I don't know. I couldn't equalize deeper than 80 meters. And he'd only been doing the sport for 2 years. I'd been doing it for 20 years at this point. And he had figured out a way to move air around in your mouth.
Huh,
But more than that, he'd figured out how to explain it to an old bloke like me and said, "You just do this." And it's like the penny dropped. I went out and did it the very next day and started going deeper. I was like, "Oh my goodness."
wow.
Did I met you 10 years ago?
Yeah, isn't that fascinating? And I want to thank you so much for sharing. both the experiences of free diving, but the lessons in that, in terms of these moments, this moment in time when people are, they know that there's a performance level they have to deliver. It is going to be under pressure. And they either default to the patterns that nature creates for us to protect us, or they liberate themselves with some learned patterns that they create T -1, -2, -3, -4, so that they can create a pathway over time, cross that line, get into flow, and deliver performance in the moment in time. Thank you so much for sharing all that with us, sharing the framework, and passing on the wisdom that you have around this.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity to share. I really enjoy being able to share some of these insights for business, because often we think, oh, sport's a whole different thing. But you know what? It's all human behavior, and it's all the same of how we react under pressure. So hopefully there's one or two little gems in there for some of the listeners.
Yeah, and absolutely the application is to business. Business is one of the most powerful forces for good on the planet, if the right people are leading it. And a part of that is people that understand that pressure is their ally. They can just figure out how to shift it from fear. So thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to seeing your next free dive feat. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Simon. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.